Some stories end with a goodbye, but what if this one didn't? What if, instead of leaving behind her sister in the shadows of Chicago, 11 stayed a little longer, said something a little different? What if Callie, 008, had chosen to return to Hawkins? Not to escape the past, but to confront something far worse. In this timeline, it isn't just 11 who faces the storm. This time, her sister fights beside her. The rain had slowed by the time 11 turned back toward the hideout. Her face was still wet, part from the storm, part from everything else. She stood in the doorway, her heart heavy, the city stretched out behind her in a blur of neon and concrete. Inside, Callie waited. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched Jane, her sister, like she knew something had changed. The room was quiet, save for the distant sirens and the faint buzz of the TV in the corner. Callie leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. She looked like she was ready for another goodbye, but this time, it didn't come. Instead, 11 stepped closer. Her voice was soft but steady. She told Callie about Hawkins, about the shadows spreading from the upside down, about her friends, about the things she saw when she closed her eyes, a shape with no face, a voice that wasn't a voice, and a fear that felt like it could tear the world apart. She said she couldn't do it alone anymore. And maybe for the first time, Callie listened, not as the hardened survivor, but as a sister who once shared the same cold fluorescent walls in the rainbow room. She didn't say yes right away, but she didn't say no either. She looked at 11 for a long time. They nodded once. By sunrise, they were on a bus headed east. The windows fogged up as the city disappeared behind them. Neither spoke much, but 11 leaned her head on Callie's shoulder somewhere around Indiana. They didn't talk about the lab, or the pain. Not yet. For now, it was enough that they were together. Hawkins hadn't changed. Not really. The roads still curved the same way. The trees still bent under the wind like they were listening to something no one else could hear. But under the surface, everything felt wrong. Stranger. They arrived just before dusk. Mike was the first to see her. He opened the door expecting only Elle, but froze when he saw Callie standing beside her. Dark eyes, black eyeliner, a silence that felt almost aggressive. Mike didn't say much, just stepped aside and let them in. The others followed slowly. Dustin, Lucas, Max. Steve lingered near the wall, arms crossed, not saying anything, but definitely saying something. Introductions were awkward. Trust didn't come easily, especially not for people who'd been through what they had. Callie didn't sugarcoat anything. She told them who she was, what she could do, what she had done. The group didn't fully get it, but they understood power and trauma. That part they knew too well. 11 stood by Callie through every second. She didn't beg them to accept her. She just asked them to try. Over the next few days, the group watched Callie from a distance. Her powers were different from Elle's, less brute force, more psychological. She could twist what people saw, make things that weren't there, mask reality itself. Some of it was terrifying, some of it strangely beautiful, and the more she trained with Elle, the more they began to move in sync. They weren't just sisters, they were reflections. One moved the world, the other bent it. There were moments of friction, of course. Callie wasn't used to compromise. She spoke bluntly. She had no filter, no patience for small talk or moral debates. Max pushed back on her hard. So did Lucas. They called her out for her past, for how she used her powers like weapons. But Elle never wavered. She saw the pain behind the sharp edges. She had lived it too. Together they started preparing. Not just for something bad, but for him. Vecna. They didn't know his name yet, not fully, but the nightmares had started. And Elle felt the same pull in her head that she did back in Chicago. A darkness, a presence that reached out and wanted. It wasn't the mind flayer, it was something older, smarter, more personal. Callie felt it too, not in dreams, but in flashes. Moments where her illusions slipped or her mind echoed with something foreign. They both knew, something was coming, and this time they weren't going to face it alone. Training wasn't something the group had ever really done before. They'd survived, reacted, adapted, but they had never prepared. Not like this. Not with time ticking down and a storm on the horizon. Not with two girls who could reshape the world around them using nothing but their minds. The old gymnasium at Hawkins High School became their base. It was quiet, unused, and large enough to test the limits of their abilities. 11 stood in the corner, eyes closed, blood already running from her nose. Across from her, Callie watched with her arms crossed, silently calculating. She was always observing, always gauging. But this time, it wasn't to manipulate, it was to protect. The others stood in a rough circle around them. Steve paced near the bleachers, chewing on his nails. Dustin scribbled diagrams no one understood. Lucas kept a stopwatch in hand, counting down their practice intervals. Max lingered off to the side, watching everything, not saying much, but never looking away from Callie. At first, there was tension. 11 was used to pushing, to reaching with her power and forcing things to bend. She crushed cans and threw lockers and shattered glass like second nature. But Callie's power worked differently, subtler. It slipped between the cracks. Where 11 broke through doors, Callie made you believe the door never existed in the first place. They tried combinations. 11 would push, and Callie would cloak. They failed more than they succeeded. Elle's energy was explosive and imprecise. If she concentrated too hard, the illusions would shatter. If Callie made the illusions too real, Elle lost her bearings entirely. There were headaches, nosebleeds, fainting spells. Callie's hands trembled after long sessions. Elle's balance wavered. Still, they kept at it. Eventually, the pieces started to fit. 11 learned how to hold back just enough, to sense what was real and what wasn't, even when Callie filled the gym with duplicates of herself or made the walls disappear entirely. She'd mask Elle in illusions, projecting her image to the opposite side of the room, forcing everyone to guess where she actually stood. Slowly, the others began to trust her. Not completely, not yet, but they saw the difference. Dustin noticed how she stayed late to help with planning. Lucas admitted she could probably beat him in a foot race. Steve stopped watching her like she might stab someone at any moment. Even Max nodded once when Callie instinctively threw up a mental wall to block one of Elle's power bursts that had veered too close to the bleachers. And in quiet moments between training, Callie and 11 began to speak again like sisters, not as weapons. They didn't talk about the lab, not directly, but the rainbow room still lived between them. There were fragments of old songs, half-remembered rhymes, the memory of sitting cross-legged on cold tile, whispering secrets only they understood. They didn't need to say it aloud. They had both been raised in cages, and now they were learning how to fly. The first real test came sooner than anyone expected. It started with a sound, barely more than a vibration, deep and sickening. Something felt off in town. The sky was too still. The trees didn't move. It was like the world was holding its breath. Elle sat bolt upright in the gym, eyes wide. Callie followed her gaze before she even spoke. She knew. They all did. Vecna was close. Max fell to the floor a few minutes later, completely still. Her eyes rolled back, limbs stiff. The group snapped into motion, panic in every movement. They had seen this before. They knew what came next. But this time, they were ready. Callie stepped in first, placing 2 fingers against Max's temple and closing her eyes. Her breath slowed. Her body was still. She didn't speak, but her presence was immediate, sharp, focused. She followed the threat of Vecna's intrusion straight into the mindscape. 11 entered a moment later, sliding into the space beside her like gravity pulling her down. Inside Max's mind, everything was fractured. The school hallway, the cemetery, the bedroom. Pieces of memory floated in suspended time, cracked and incomplete. And in the center of it all, Vecna stood like a puppet master surrounded by threads of trauma. He didn't notice them at first. Callie moved through the space like smoke, silent and invisible, bending the edges of the world as she went. She pulled shadows over their movements, creating false Maxes, false doors, even a copy of Vecna himself, one designed to draw his gaze just long enough. 11 built the pressure. She didn't strike immediately. She let the energy build behind her eyes until it throbbed in her skull. When she released it, it came like a scream, psychic and sharp, a sonic force that slammed into Vecna's chest and sent him staggering. He recovered quickly, too quickly. His focus snapped to her, rage twisting his features. But before he could retaliate, his surroundings shifted. The walls vanished, the sky darkened, the floor crumbled into a pit of mirrors. Nothing made sense. Nothing was real. Callie had wrapped the entire mindscape in a loop of illusions. He struck wildly, lashing out at things that weren't there. Illusion after illusion shattered under his force, but never the real target. 11 kept pushing. Her nose bled. Her body shook, but she didn't stop. They held him for only a few minutes. That's all it was. A few heartbeats of resistance. But it was enough. Max gasped awake on the gym floor. The lights exploded above them. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and Vecna's connection severed, snapped like a wire stretched too tight. They had hurt him. He wasn't invincible. Back at the hideout, the group sat in silence. Max rubbed her eyes, still reeling. Dustin hovered, trying not to fall apart. Lucas held her hand in both of his, visibly shaken but grounded. Callie leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, head tilted slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She'd proven herself. She had saved a life. And 11, sitting beside her on the floor with blood still running from her nose, simply reached out and took her hand. For the first time, they were no longer lost girls. They were a team. The sky over Hawkins burned red. Clouds swirled above like angry ink and water, roiling without wind. A deep rumble echoed through the earth, a sound not tied to any weather or machine. Something older, sentient, and hateful. The air was thick with ash and charged particles. Everyone could feel it. In their lungs, their bones, behind their eyes. This was it. The final descent. They had mapped the path carefully. The forest behind the old Creel house had cracked open again, an exposed vein leading to the Upside Down. That's where Vecna waited. Somewhere in the center of the rot, where time and gravity broke and the world screamed silently in every direction. His lair sat at the edge of all things, a pulsing heart of tendrils, bones, and whispers. It breathed like a beast. It listened like a god. They moved fast. Steve and Robin cleared the outer tunnels. Dustin stayed near the gate with Lucas and Max, ready to pull them out if things fell apart. Nancy was armed, but this time she wasn't alone. At the center of the formation were the sisters. 11's stare was locked, jaw tight. Her posture said war even before she moved. Her powers had matured, more controlled now, refined. She no longer lashed out with wild force. She was a scalpel. Beside her, Callie moved like vapor, her energy less visible but always present. Her presence distorted the space around her, bending light in subtle ways. She could be standing right in front of someone and remain unseen, but there was no hesitation in her steps. She was all in. They stepped into Vecna's domain together. The lair felt alive. The walls pulsed with a sick rhythm, veins of glowing red threading through blackened stone. Twisted roots spiraled from the floor, some ending in shriveled faces half embedded in the surface. The ground crunched beneath their boots, bone fragments, dried blood, pieces of lives already consumed. The closer they got, the more the air pressed in. Time warped slightly. Things repeated. Footsteps echoed before they landed, shadows moved in reverse. Breath fogged, then vanished. None of it was natural. None of it could be trusted. They kept moving. Then everything stopped. Ahead, on a raised platform wrapped in flesh-like webbing, Vecna waited. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was overwhelming, heavy, suffocating. His eyes, pale and hollow, looked onto them, and in that instant, the battle began. It was a psychic war. The physical space collapsed around them, restructured into a battlefield of the mind. A void cracked open beneath their feet, and they were falling, not in body, but in thought. Memory bled into perception. Reality scattered. Vecna dragged them into his world, a space he completely controlled. But this time, he didn't know Callie. As the mindscape twisted into a dark cathedral of horror, filled with echoes of pain and regret, Callie blurred the edges. She fractured the reality Vecna constructed, overlaying it with false spaces, hallways that led nowhere, reflections of 11 running in opposite directions, even distorted echoes of Vecna himself whispering lies into his own mind. He hesitated. He struck forward, only to find illusions. He reached for Elle and grabbed nothing. He threw his spear at a shape only to see it vanish like mist. Callie overwhelmed him with noise. 11 used the silence. She waited, still and centered, behind the wall of illusion her sister crafted. Her memories stayed sharp. Mike's smile, Hopper's beard, the softness of Max's voice. She held them like anchors. When she moved, it wasn't to fight him head on. It was to break through him. Her power flared, a wave of force that ripped through the center of the mindscape like a white-hot pulse. Vecna stumbled, caught off balance. The illusions shifted. Callie gave him a duplicate of himself, bloody and broken, screaming back at him. He faltered. He didn't expect to be confused. He didn't expect to be afraid. That crack was all they needed. 11 drove forward with everything she had. Blood poured from her ears now, her body trembling under the weight of the power she was channeling. Callie held the world together behind her, constantly weaving false paths, confusing Vecna's senses, keeping his focus split in 1,000 directions. And then he turned to her, the illusionist. Vecna's mind lashed out in a spear of psychic agony. It slammed into Callie and shattered the mental shield she'd wrapped herself in. She staggered, eyes wide, gasping as her connection to the mindscape trembled. Blood trickled down her cheek. For a moment, she was exposed. Vecna lunged, but Elle moved first. She caught him mid-air, suspended in psychic grip. Her scream echoed through the void as she threw him back with enough force to rip chunks out of the dream space. Everything flickered. Sky, ground, even her own body. It was all breaking. Callie recovered just in time. She flooded Vecna's mind with the sound of 1,000 whispers, versions of himself repeating his own lies back at him. He stumbled, caught in a loop, disoriented. That's when 11 reached out again. She didn't use rage. She didn't use fear. She used memory. She pulled everything she loved, every piece of light she had left, and funneled it through her power like a final heartbeat. It exploded from her, colliding with Vecna's core, fracturing it from the inside. He didn't scream. He dissolved. The mindscape cracked. The cathedral fell. The flesh walls peeled back. Light burst through the cracks like a sunrise over the ocean. It was over. They collapsed on the floor of the Upside Down, side by side, breathing, broken, alive. The silence was complete. Then it began to rain, a soft white ash falling from the cracks above, fragments of the world Vecna had created, disintegrating into dust. The group found them minutes later. Steve carried Elle. Robin helped Callie limp back through the gate. The Upside Down trembled behind them, falling apart at the seams. Back in Hawkins, there was still chaos, still fear, but something had shifted. Max opened her eyes 3 days later. The darkness was gone from her mind. Eddie's name was cleared, the gates sealed for the last time, and in the shadows, the sisters remained close. They weren't heroes in the way the town understood. They didn't need parades or applause. They were the kind of heroes who carried each other through hell and came out changed, still healing, still growing, together, always. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.